It's Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We're coming to you from San Diego County, joined by Steve Padilla. He was the mayor of Chula Vista about 10 years ago. He had been on the council before that, and he is seeking a return engagement. But he is running differently than when he ran for city council the first time around. The first time around, you ran at large. This time you're running how?
Just by district, first time.
So let's talk about that. What's the genesis of this notion that in a city of 250,000, we now are electing council by district?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me.
Always.
I think the feeling of voters in 2012 when they adopted that was they needed more geographic balance in the city. It's a growing city. It's been one of the fastest growing cities historically in the country. Right now, it's about 300,000 people. It'll build out closer to 500,000 people.
Second largest city in San Diego County.
Absolutely.
It's for real.
Yeah, not a small town anymore.
And as we know, the California Voting Rights Act of 2001 requires this type of action. Some cities are being dragged, screaming and kicking. Your city did it more gently, I guess you could say.
Yeah, organically.
So how is it then, though? Because here you were used to running citywide, both as mayor and city council. You ran last year for city council and lost by a hair. Was it 2 votes?
2 votes.
But now it's so what, 50,000 people in your district?
65,000.
So talk to us about the distinctions.
Oh, I think it's in some ways really good. I mean, it's a different dynamic on the ground. I mean, you know, there's a little bit more balance in terms of how you can engage local neighborhoods,
right.
You know, kind of block by block. You can focus a little bit on really knowing. Trust me, if you go to somebody's door and you ask them, hey, tell me what's going on in the neighborhood, they're going to tell you. And they're going to tell you the neighborhood gossip.
Right.
And they're going to tell you what neighbors they like and don't like. You're really going to learn what's going on in that community.
But how do you make sure that now that you each will be elected by a certain group in a certain geography, that you will listen to those constituents, but also consider how your actions affect the entire city?
Well, you always have to look, first of all, at the whole city, because, you know, there's a total council of 5 people. It takes 3 votes to pass any legislation or set any policy or do anything. So there always has to be that broader city perspective. And you hope that most of the time there isn't a conflict between what you think is good in the district or the community thinks is good and what's going, you know, good for the broader community. Usually they're pretty much aligned.
I want to talk about a measure that will be before the voters of Chula Vista at the same time you're on the ballot, November 8th. That is known as Measure P. It is a half-cent sales tax increase for 10 years. Now, simultaneously, the county of San Diego has its own half-cent sales tax increase for 40 years. That's for transportation projects. At the same time, the state is eliminating a quarter-cent sales tax because Prop 30 is not being extended, at least on the sales tax front. For the wealthiest, we're going to the voters on that issue. Lots on the ballot taxing-wise. What are you hearing about Measure P?
I think people understand it. I think people know, first of all, again, when you go and knock on doors, when you're in neighborhoods, they know what needs to be done. They'll tell you, look, you know, the streets haven't been repaired as often or frequently as they need to be. I want certain improvements to my park space. I want to make darn sure that if I need to call 911, that the people are able, we have enough people staffing, police, firefighters, so they're going to get here in time. And oh, by the way, they're going to have the training and the equipment they need to do the job well.
And as you may know, firefighting, specifically in Chula Vista, we've seen response times not hit targets.
Exactly.
The desire to have a response time of under 7 minutes, 80% of the time. And the last 4 or 5 years, those targets have not been hit. And in the nation, the goal is a 5-minute response time. So, you know, one could argue there is an issue here, but is money the answer? Does money resolve that deficit?
You have to allocate the resources to deploy enough people, to cover enough ground. It's just physics to be able to respond in a timely fashion. Because when it comes to public safety, whether you're talking about fire, medical, or PD, you know, it's not just a quality of service and do you go on Yelp and give it a 4 or 5 stars. We're talking about the difference between whether someone survives, lives, or dies. And so at the end of the day, obviously, you have to make sure you can squeeze efficiencies, you can deploy smartly, you can, you know, Chula Vista has managed in the Great Recession to do a lot with less, and that's something they should be proud of. But at the end of the day, you need to be able to at least meet national standards, in my opinion. You need to be able to do the primary function of local government, which is to provide for safe neighborhoods and public safety. And you darn well better have the people, the training, and the equipment that you need to respond when people need it. Otherwise, what's the quality of life in the community? It could cost someone their life.
Right. The challenge for supporters of Measure P, though, I mentioned that San Diego has its own sales tax measure. That's the county, and Chula Vista is in the county. We also have Measure Z, which is Southwest Community College District, which I understand covers Chula Vista. That's a bond. It's separate.
Right.
But you have a cigarette tax as well. You have a school construction bond as well. And so how do you kind of get through the haze of all of these revenue measures?
Well, I think people need to understand what they're getting for their investment. How do they make sure they're getting that for their investment, and whether it's effective? And I think that, frankly, people think that, for example, housing pays all the costs of local government. People say all the time, we have all this housing in Chula Vista. You guys have all this sales tax money. Why don't, I already pay for it. And what they don't understand is the state takes most of it, and special districts take, and then cities get what's left. And as a matter of fact, that's one of the challenges that Chula Vista faces, is for too long, they've been over-reliant on residential housing and the housing market. And you can't survive financially as a complete city. When you're the size of 300,000 people and growing, you can't be a bedroom community suburb of San Diego. You have to balance that, with industrial and commercial. You better give people an opportunity to live and work in the same community, because the revenue, the portfolio, if you will, is not diverse, and you don't have enough revenue to sustain and leverage the kinds of things you need to do to have a well-run city.
At the same time, housing is an issue. It's an issue in Chula Vista, in San Diego County, and throughout California. We're not building enough houses to meet the demand. And that demand is particularly high in coastal counties like San Diego. And so there's obviously this push-pull that you're mentioning, but how do we get to a place where we're building enough stock at various income levels so Chula Vista can grow in such a way that meets the needs of all income levels?
Well, first, not to be parochial, but Chula Vista certainly, as a city, has always provided more than enough housing. In fact, not just for its own jurisdiction, but for the region.
Okay, I hear you.
We have been the supplier of a variety of housing, from low income, moderate, up to custom, multi-million-dollar homes. There's a broad economic diversity of housing in Chula Vista. There is more than ample produced low and moderate income housing. So the issue in Chula Vista is not, are we producing enough housing? Are we producing enough low-income housing so people can get into a home and get from being a renter to being a homeowner? Frankly, Chula Vista has been a leader in the region for years in inclusionary housing policies, which says to developers, if you're going to come in and build a project over so many units, you have to make sure that some of those units are dedicated to entry-level or to low and moderate income housing. People say, well, why do you need to do that? And the answer is to house your workforce. Our workforce in the county as a whole, on average, in many, many cases, too high a percentage of people in San Diego County who we depend on to work and help keep the engine of San Diego County's economic engine going, they can't afford their basic housing and transportation needs. And that's unacceptable. And we have to house that workforce. Chula Vista does more than its share. Frankly, I would love to see other jurisdictions in the region step up and do more than draw on a piece of paper where they might, in theory, build some, but actually build some.
Let me ask you as to why you're stepping up again. You've served your city well. You were on the city council for 8 years. You were mayor for 4 years. You were on the coastal commission. You were on the port commission. One can say you've done your public service. Why do you want to come back? What's the reason?
Well, other than being a masochist,
exactly.
No, I love this community. I mean,
you grew up there?
I grew up there. I've skinned my knees there. I learned the lessons of life. It's given me every opportunity. I love public policy. I love being involved. In you guessed.
Who would have thought?
Who would have thought, right? The way this guy talks, how could you tell he's a policy nerd?
Right.
But I love being part of solving problems. I have been a part of a lot of planning for an amazing future for this community, which is an important community in this region. I mean, look at where it's located. Look at the diversity of it. I mean, it's really an important community in the region.
And you'll come back?
I want to see it get done.
You'll come back?
Oh, absolutely.
His name is Steve Padilla. He is a candidate for the Chula Vista City Council. My name is Brad Pomerance, Local Edition.
Thank you, Brad.